Let's go. What's up, y'all? Hope everybody's having a good afternoon. I thought I would just get going with a quick afternoon stream here. And today we're Joyce Carol Oates and her short story, Going Where Have You Been? And I thought that this would be appropriate for now because we're just going to do a quick, about an hour long stream here. And because it's a short story, um, we could spend a lot of time on this particular work, but it's really interesting. And it just occurred to me today. I just sort of was thinking about, what to cover next, and it sort of popped into the old skull here. So I just thought that we would cover it. And I'm all dressed up. Of course, don't worry. I'm gonna take my hat off where I'm going. Okay, I got etiquette, but I got something to do immediately right after this. I got to leave for that and something good. Um, so I'm all dressed up for that. But actually, I'm dressed up in celebration for the for what we've been waiting for here, y'all, and that is the 10K view stream. You guys, we made it. We made it to 10,000 views across all our videos on this channel. Can you believe it? Thank you so much to everybody who has supported me, all of my friends out there, everybody who's watched, everybody who's subbed, everybody who's watching. I hope everybody who's watching, especially later, hits that subscribe button. And please go ahead and hit the like on the video, the obligatory smash that like. Everybody, please smash that like. Leave a comment for me underneath after the video's over. Go ahead and drop into the chat with our homies here. And also, especially if you want to support me and want to support the channel, please don't hesitate to drop a couple of PayPals or Cash Apps or Venmos in there in the links. And my homies in there, Jeff and Ellie, are gonna leave. They're my homies, and they're gonna probably leave links for you so you can super chat. You guys, we're about 525 subs, so we're over halfway there to 1,000. When we get there, then we can start super chatting for real here. It's gonna be cool. So really appreciate that from y'all. So let's just go ahead and dive in. Today we're covering Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been? A short story by Joyce Carol Oates. Of course, I just got a printout version here, but I thought, I first read this story, I don't know, about 5 years ago, and man, it struck me hard. This is a great story. Of course, when I say short story, I don't mean that in a sort of a vernacular sense. What I mean is like that's an actual literary genre. Of course, we've discussed that before. We haven't really gone over many short stories. But a short story is essentially a work of prose fiction that is about under about 100 pages. Getting up there into that territory, then you start to call it a novella, which is basically a short novel, and then a novel is a longer piece of prose fiction. So this is a true short story, and it's by the infamous Joyce Carol Oates. Maybe I thought of Joyce Carol Oates because I remember Jay over at Jay's Analysis, our friend over there, talking about Flannery O'Connor recently. And so maybe in the old skull, I thought Flannery O'Connor, and that related it. That made me think of Joyce Carol Oates. I think Joyce Carol Oates is still living, sort of a mistress of contemporary and modern American Gothic horror, but not Gothic in the way that we've covered it before. We've done Frankenstein here, we've done Lord Byron. There certainly is a Byronic hero in this short story. Not a hero. He's a villain. Whoa, I misspoke. But there is a Byronic figure in this short story. So let me give you a quick rundown just of the plot real quick, because I don't know if you guys have read this. You may have read this, but I'm guessing probably a lot of my audience hasn't read it. Not because, not for any particular reason. I mean, we have, of course, the most high IQ audience here. But even that being said, I wouldn't expect you to have read this particular short story. It's pretty esoteric. It's one kind of way in the it's kind of a deep cut. So let me give you a little rundown of the plot. First of all, the short story was published in 1966. I think you're really going to like this, by the way. If you haven't read this story, you're going to want to afterwards. And, I'm not here to try and get anybody to read or anything like that. But I think that you're really going to like this story. This will appeal to us. It was published in 1966, and it came out. One of her inspirations for this was a serial killer or perhaps just a killer in the early to mid '60s, known as the Pied Piper of Tucson. And I'm going to get into what that means, but um, this is kind of a short story about a serial killer that's not about a serial killer. It's also extremely the occult imagery in this goes pretty hard, although it sort of rests underneath the surface. And so what happens basically in the story is it's called "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" And we're going to see where that title comes from and what it means in a second. It is dedicated to Bob Dylan. It's partly dedicated to Bob Dylan and Joyce Carol Oates' own words. I don't like to, we've said this many times, but I don't like to look to the author for answers to questions about the text per se. I like to judge the text on its own merit, but it is pretty obvious with the end of the short story. It's pretty short. It's about, I mean, even printed out like in a PDF, it's like 14 pages. Pretty short, and but it is complete. It is a great story. It's really good, you guys. And there's a line at the end of the short story about Baby Blue. Of course, it's dedicated to Bob Dylan, and that is supposed to be a take on Bob Dylan's song "It's All Over Now, Baby Blue." You may recognize that. You may recognize the Stones song, but the lyrics for that song will play into this short story pretty strongly. Um, so it's about a girl. Her name is Connie. She's it says her name was Connie. She was fit. This is the start of the short story. Her name was Connie. She was 15 and she had a quick, nervous, giggling habit of craning her neck to glance into mirrors or checking other people's faces to make sure her own was all right. Her mother, who noticed everything and knew everything and hadn't much reason any longer to look at her own face, always scolded Connie about it. "Stop gawking at yourself. Who are you? You think you're so pretty?" she would say. Connie would raise her eyebrows at these familiar old complaints and look right through her mother into a shadowy vision of herself as she was right at that moment. She knew she was pretty, and that was everything. Her mother had been pretty once too, if you could believe those old snapshots in the album. But now her looks were gone, and that was why she was always after Connie. That's the opening paragraph. Now, one thing to be said for a short story, Poe, right? Of course we've covered Poe here. It's one of the major short story streams we did. There's a lot of Poe's influence in this, but one of the major things about crafting a short story or about reading a short story is that the prose has to be tight. It's almost verse like, right? It's almost poetic in the sense that the real estate is expensive, as we've said when talking about poetry or verse. Real estate is expensive. There's only so much room to express the narrative, and we have to get a lot of details in a short span, right, and in a short amount of time. And we actually get a lot from that opening paragraph. First of all, her name was Connie. We know this is in the third person. She's 15. The girl's a teenager. She's pretty, right? Uh-oh. Hopefully I'm still going here. Hold on. Hopefully I'm still going. Yeah, it looks like I got a strong signal. I don't know what's buffering there. Okay. Yeah. We've got a pretty girl. And we've got her relationship with her mother. Her relationship. Thank you, Crispy. Her relationship with her mom is strained. Obviously, this is a very '60s story, and it's very much a story set in the early to mid '60s, prior to the what Hunter S. Thompson called, we referred to before as the crest of a high and beautiful wave. But there is something sinister lurking here, right? This is weird scenes inside the canyon, weird scenes inside the gold mine, as Jim Morrison called it. There's a little bit of element of Jim Morrison in this story, by the way, with the guy who's about to come up that I'm going to describe. And we've also got a few things. We've got, first of all, her character is immediately described, right? She's quick, nervous, giggling. The fact that she cranes her neck, it relates her to an actual crane, right? And we're going to see the importance of the neck later on in the short story. It's implied, it's completely elliptical, and it's also specifically spoken about in relation to the guy who is the villain in this short story who is going to come up. There's a specific scene that describes his neck, which is pretty stark. In the second sentence, also, she's glancing in mirrors and she's checking other people's faces to make sure her own was all right. So immediately we have this idea of mirrors, which plays a major role in this short story, and the idea of the psyche, and certainly the breaking of the psyche, which occurs in the story. She's narcissistic, at least her mother says she is. She looks to others to see herself, or at least she's always comparing others to see herself, right? Um, and she looks right through her mother. We picture her mother as a kind of a wicked witch, or a what's her name in Sleeping Beauty? Mal, guys, what's her name? What's the Angelina Jolie character's name in the Disney version, in the live action version for Sleeping Beauty? Maleficent. She's a Maleficent, right? Evil. Um, a shadowy vision of herself. Well, thank you, Jeff. So we certainly have a shadowy vision of characters, or even shade or demon shade characters that appear in this short story explicitly. And we also have a word here that I think is coded throughout the language of the short story, which is the word familiar. Connie would say, her would raise her eyebrows at these familiar old complaints. The familiar and the familiar spirit is going to play a role in this. So let me give you a rundown of what the story is about before I dive deeper into the text and looking at the actual text. Connie is a 15-year-old girl. She's in, average white picket fence America in the 60s, right? She's a boomer child. And she lives with her older sister. Her older sister is grown but still lives at the house. And she's prettier than her older sister, but her mother favors her older sister. Her mother also has sisters, and her mother hates her. Her mother is gossiping on the phone with her sisters all day, or always talking. She mentions how she's always mentioning her older sister in a good light, and she's always criticizing her when talking about her, right? And we also get there's something noticeable in here, which is the absent father. Her father is not there. He never makes an appearance in this. He is described as being at work, or he's always away. And Connie basically goes out with her sister goes out with her friends, and they do boring things. And then Connie goes out with her friends, and they basically go to the Galleria, and they hang out, and they go to meet boys or whatever. But one night she's there, and she's about to talk to a boy, and she turns and she catches sight of this guy. And the guy immediately, it's described as that when she sees him, she's breathing in. So she's inspired, right, by this guy. She sucks her breath in, and she sees this guy leaning against a car. And the guy is described as tall, lean, languid, kind of wiry, muscular. He's got dark, shaggy hair, which looks like a wig, they say. And he's wearing sort of all black, and he's leaning against a gold car. And they make eye contact. She can't forget about the face of this guy. She can't get him out of her mind. She goes back home. The next day is Sunday, and there's church, but she doesn't go to church. And we're going to talk about what that means in the story, and the fact that, like, there's this emphasis. You could read the story as an interpretation of American consumerism, right? Especially the rise of consumerism in in the 50s, and then going into the 60s, and how that results in the created culture, the counterculture. She loves, like, pop songs, listens to music all day. But anyway, she's at home, and all of a sudden she hears a noise, and she looks outside. She's the only one home. She looks outside through the door, and there's the guy. He's standing there against his gold car. There's a guy in the passenger. There's a guy in shotgun, a guy in the passenger side, but he never twice, but he never really looks at them. The guy immediately starts talking to her, and he says, basically, you're mine, come on out here and we'll go for a ride. And she feels a sense of dread, but she also keeps talking to him, and her heart keeps pounding. Okay. He, on his car, he has his name written in sort of a side. He has a coded message, which is coded numbers, 33, 19, 17, 33. You know where this is going. His name is Arnold Friend. Okay, that's the guy's name. And he's got mirror shades on. Mirrors. We just talked about mirrors. And she looks at him, she sort of sees herself, but also he seems to observe everything. Can you guess who Arnold Friend is, you guys? Now, there are a few different interpretations. I mean, it's pretty obvious when you read it. When I would say it would be obvious to you when you read it. It's not obvious to normies when they read it. They would. A lot of people can read this in a feminist interpretation and say this represents the loss of innocence or the loss of feminine identity. You could read this as an interpretation or an allegory for consumerism and capitalism in the 60s. But I would read this as number one. I immediately think of our boy Henry Lee Lucas. He's a good boy, Henry Lee Lucas. Let's let him off. We ain't gonna put him through old Sparky, right? Our boy Henry Lee Lucas, Henry Lee Lucas, W's boy, not our boy, W's boy, and Otis Toole, sort of pair of traveling serial killers. This guy's certainly menacing. But who do you think that he is? Well, Arnold Friend is an old friend or Arnold Fiend, an old fiend, right? He's old scratch. He's Lucifer, and he's come to take her. And he the descriptions of him are subtle and really clever and really well done because he's not there to make a deal with her, right? But he does say that he always keeps his word and he's going to take her somewhere. And this is not the normal interpretation. This is not the normal interpretation of how Lucifer appears. There are echoes of the Washington Irving story, The Devil and Tom Walker, which we could cover, because there's a man and wife in that, and there's Old Scratch appears, etc. But this is different. And the whole time you're reading this, you're thinking, "Girl, go back inside the house." But he tells her at one point, like, "Don't. You can go back inside the house, and I can't come in. But the moment that you call the police, you invite me in." And he says that your house is nothing to him. It's just a bunch of old cardboard, and he could just kick it away like nothing, which is sort of we get a lot of Gnostic elements within the story, right? That she's talking to the demiurge, and he wants her to transcend her mortal coil and walk with him into illumination. I mean, it is the story is pretty explicit about going with this character, with this guy, going into a big bright field where the sun is shining and being full of light. And I just can't help but think of that scene at the end of The Ninth Gate, right, where John Depp, Boris Balkan is dead, and John Depp does the ritual, and then he walks into the castle, and the castle is full of the illuminated light of Satan, because they're of course they're in eternal darkness in hell. But he tells her that she will feel warm in his arms, right? And the Twilight language in this story is pretty hard. It goes pretty hard. It's pretty tough. It's pretty constant, and it reads like a Masonic ritual. Is the only thing that I can sort of compare it to. It reads like you're going along the steps of the checkerboard floor steps of a Masonic ritual that she does not know that she's a part of. And anyway, at the end, that happens. She goes with him, and we're to read into what happens in the rest of the story. But she does say at the end that she has this feeling that she's never going to sleep in her own bed again. And she says she doesn't want to go to that field because she has a feeling she'll never leave, and she won't leave because her body will become part of that field. And again, this short story was inspired by an actual serial killing that took place. And it reads like every account of a serial killer who seduces some poor girl, right? I mean, remember all the stuff about Ted Bundy and all these guys, right? That the other interesting thing is that he's a shapeshifter, and he you can tell that he's a shapeshifter, even though he never shifts shape within the bounds of the story. But because his mask, remember we just mentioned mask, because his mask seems to be falling off during the course of events, she recognizes that he's not who he says he is. And even his eyes, because he takes off his sunglasses and puts them on his head, and it seems like his sunglasses on his head are holding the wig in place that's covering his horns. His feet are described like they're in these boots, but they're sort of they move sideways as almost as if he's like trying to fit hooves inside of his boots. And he does a specific Baphomet pose over the course of events in this story. This is a really good story. It's really well written. It's not good in terms of what it's saying, obviously. Obviously we're reading about something incredibly dark here, but it's what I mean is it's crafted well. And part of this is one of my I'd say my thesis for this, my little hot take on this story is that we're reading about a girl who is the victim of circumstance of a family that hates her, and her mind has already been broken and primed prior to the start of the story. um, I don't know if this involves ABUSE before the story. I can't read into it. There's only so much in the short story, but I would say there are indications that something has happened to her, but that may not be the case. She may just be primed for this, in terms of her own character arc before the story begins. Right, kind of begins in media res in a way, and that when she meets this character who tells her everything that she needs to know, she has enough of a background to know I shouldn't be talking to you, and she backs out, but she doesn't have enough strength. And part of the reason she doesn't have enough strength is because she has no spiritual strength. She's not religious, right? And the reason I say that is because the story is inverted in that her church is the church of things, shopping, and consumerism and capitalism, because it's sort of backwards. While everyone else goes to church, she's shopping, and the story, the art, the way the narrative takes place is like sort of backwards. Um, Nobody else seems to see this character, but she does. And obviously, he's supposed to be, a Lucifer Mephistopheles character, and the other guy is supposed to be is supposed to be a Beelzebub character. And the Beelzebub character is, and I'm sorry to say this, Ellie. I'm sorry to say this, but no reflection on our beautiful Ellie here. Unfortunately, she names the Beelzebub character Ellie, and I would say that the reason for that is because as Jamie has pointed out in her streams, right, about what were they covering? Jamie and Jay covered Stranger Things, and they were talking about why the character is named 11. We get not only the EL, right, which is like the name of a god, right, and we get that he's sort of some sort of demigod or demon, but also 11 is the number of magic, right, of ritual and occult magic, and why did I, that's not just a random thing that I've thrown in there, because numbers play an important role in this on purpose. He specifically says he has a code, and the code again is 33 19 17. He has it written on the side of his his golden chariot of a car. And obviously 33 is the number of the adept masonic ritual initiation of the master mason, and 19 and 17 seem to be both the numbers that it seems to be that his number is 33, like he's pretending to be a 33-year-old, but also a teenager in the story. 19 and 17 seem to be the numbers of prior victims. Also, we have Judges 19 and 17, which plays a part. We have Genesis 19, and there are a couple of other biblical verses where I think it's Judges 19, 17, which is 33 books away from the end of the Bible. Or is it the 33rd book of the Bible? Somebody correct me. But in that verse, it is mentioned that the character asks one of who I forget who it is in Judges who says this, but asks, "Where are you going? Where have you been?" And what happens in Judges 19:17, you guys? Isn't that where the prostitute is? Something happens to the prostitute in the morning, is found, and then is cut up into 12 pieces and sent to the various tribes of Israel, right? And that echoes, right, the girl in this story, Connie, and what happens to her. So we have a sort of an inversion, right, or at least an occult ritual initiation into a sacrifice. So that's my take on the short story. That is what is happening. So let's look at the actual text here. The second paragraph says, "Why don't you keep your room clean like your sister? Haven't you got your hair fixed? What the hell stinks?" So we get this idea um, the images in this are not only visual, right, but the empirical data is strong in the sense of smells, and we get the word hell reoccurring throughout this short story. And I think that if you were taking a look at this, just reading it on a literal level, you may not even notice that, but it's hard for me not to notice it reading it all of the times that the word hell. June was 24 and still lived at home. So we get her sister June in the third paragraph. June, her sister's name is June because she represents sort of an eternal summer, right? At least in the eyes of the mother. And that would be like eternal present. And notice that even with the title, we get the past and the future, but we never get a present. The present, the present tense is missing from the short story in the sense that we don't get a present time, and that uh, Connie gets stuck in this sort of forever present when she's talking to the guy because nothing is happening in the outer world outside, because time sort of falls away when she's talking to this Arnold guy. Right? Her mind was filled with trashy daydreams. And then here we get in this third paragraph, um, Connie's mother kept picking at her until Connie wished her mother was dead and she herself was dead and it was all over. Right? So again, she's primed. She's primed. All she thinks about is murder, death, kill, and how she wishes she was dead. There's an absent father. The father hasn't been mentioned. In fact, one of the other things that's echoed in this is that when their friend's father picks them up, it says when he came to pick them up again at 11, I just noticed that when he came to pick them up at 11, right? So we have a sort of 11 also represents Yakin and Boaz, right? So they're sort of walking in through the twin pillars into this sort of initiation. He never bothered to ask what they had done. So the title is "Where Are You Going? Where Have You Been?" And notice that the father never not even her father, but her friend's father never mentions that to them. He again, we have this sort of, and it's not a boomer father. We have just an absent father here who doesn't care about the family. He doesn't ask where they were. He doesn't ask where they're going, right? And they're in this present tense, which is sort of a void. In fact, the void and the idea of a void or canceling out plays a major role in this because Arnold specifically mentions it. He says that he's canceled out her present time. Her father has been canceled out, he says. Second page of this, it says, let's see, Connie had long blonde hair that drew everyone's eye to it. Drew their eye to it, right? Not their eyes. And she wore part of it pulled up over her head and puffed out, and the rest of it she let fall down her back. And haha, very funny, but high pitched and nervous anywhere else, like the jingling of the charms on her bracelet. So the idea of charms and music, the music always appears when he appears, when Arnold appears, there's music, sort of a jingling music. And she continuously mentions again the familiar, like he's a familiar spirit, like he appears out of the air. This occurs in this plays a major role in Hereditary. If you've seen Hereditary, right, where they're talking about what's his name, Paimon, the nine princes of hell and the spirits of the air, almost like she has created a familiar for herself. One night in midsummer, right? So it takes place in the high season. They went up through a maze of parked cruising cars to the bright lit, fly infested restaurant. So they're walking into this Beelzebub restaurant, Lord of the Flies. Go to my Lord of the Flies stream if you haven't seen that. Check that out. Their faces pleased and expectant, as if they were entering a sacred building that loomed up out of the night to give them what haven and blessing they yearned for. There you go. That's it. That's the short story right there, right? That vindicates my thesis. Yes, that she is primed for this sort of occult initiation that she wants. She wants a present, and she wants a present tense. She doesn't want to think about the past or the future, and she wants her forever to be filled with the 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 spices and the scents, right? Dost thou like the taste of butter? Remember in The Witch? Um, and and they walk into this Beelzebub consumerist capitalist hub of fly infestation. She just happens to mention into a sacred. Why would you describe the shopping building as sacred, right? Unless it stands for something actually sacred. It's a haven, and they yearn for it. It says they sat at the counter and crossed their legs, the ankles, their thin shoulders rigid with excitement. Crossing the ankles of the legs, is that a ritual sign? That is a ritual sign. That's a Masonic sign, crossing the ankles of the legs. Isn't it, you guys? Their thin shoulder, and listen to the music that made everything so good. Their music was always in the background, like music at a church service. It was something to depend upon, but they're not at a church service, right? They're not at a church service. They are at an anti-church service. It says, Connie couldn't help but let her eyes wander over the windshields and the faces all around her. Again, the idea of mirrors, right? She's searching through the, remember, we just had the idea of the maze and the labyrinth. She's searching through her broken psyche, looking for her true self. And she seems to think that her true self is going to, or at least we get this from the author, that her true self is going to find its meaning and its purpose in this Lucifer character, right? But everything's echoing and reflecting back at her. It says, it might have been the music. She drew her shoulders up and sucked in her breath. She inspires. This is she's wearing green, by the way. So she's meant to be sort of a virginal Eve character who's being seduced by the serpent. And it says, let's see. And just at that moment, she happened to glance at a face just a few feet from hers. It was a boy with shaggy black hair and a convertible jalopy painted gold. He stared at her, and then his lips widened into a grin. Connie slit her eyes at him and turned away, but she couldn't help glancing back, and there he was, still watching her. He wagged a finger and laughed and said, "Gonna get you, baby." And Connie turned away again without Eddie noticing anything. Fucking creepy, right? Creepy ass story. Excuse my language. Says she was thinking, dreaming. I'm on page 3 here. Thinking and dreaming about boys she met, but all the boys fell back and dissolved into a single face that was not even a face, but an idea, a feeling, mixed up with the urgent, insistent pounding of the music and the humid night air of July. What's this about the Pettinger girl? Oh, her? That dope. In other words, there's a missing girl. What happened to the missing girl? Oh, I don't know. Whatever. Also, Arnold's friend is described as a creep. He describes him that way himself, right? June's name was mentioned. Let's see. If June's name was mentioned, her mother's tone was approving, and if Connie's name was mentioned, it was disapproving. Okay, here we go. This paragraph. One Sunday, Connie got up at 11. She gets up at 11 again. Everything's at 11. None of them bothered with church, and washed her hair so that it could dry all day long in the sun. Right, which is what we just said. Go back to what I just said is my thesis for this. Right, she shook her head as if to get awake. It was too hot. It's too hot because hell's about to visit her. Right. Next page. Her heart began. Let's see. After a while, she heard a car coming up the drive. She sat up at once, startled, because it couldn't be her father so soon. The gravel kept crunching all the way from the road. The driveway was too long, and Connie ran to the window. The window again, right? Windows, mirrors. It was a car she didn't know. It was an open jalopy painted a bright gold that caught the sunlight opaquely. She can't see through it. Her heart began to pound her fingers, snatched at her hair, checking it, and she whispered, "Christ, Christ," wondering how bad she looked. The car came to a stop at the side door, and the horn sounded 4 short taps as if there were a signal Connie knew. You get the coded language in this? The horn, right? Because she has horns. And or he has horns, and because she whispers the name of Christ, right? Or she calls out to Christ. She calls out to God in her moment of excitement and greatest fear, even amongst the hellscape. He says, let's see, there were two boys in the car, and now she recognized the driver. He had shaggy, shabby black hair that looked crazy as a wig, and he was grinning at her. I am late, am I? I ain't late, am I? He said, who the hell do you think you are? Who the hell do you think you are? Now, look, I know that that's just the expression that she's using, but it's no coincidence that we have a story all about a guy who is specifically Luciferian with all of this infernal imagery, and that she says, who the hell do you think you are? The driver's glasses were metallic and mirrored everything in miniature. Again, that reminds me of Hereditary, right? With the simulacrum in Hereditary, right? The little doll houses, right? Remember King Lear? We are but playthings to the gods, right? Hey, Ellie's got a radio. See, mine broke down. He's listening to music here. Here we go. Can't you read? What's all that stuff painted on your car? Can't you read? He opened the door very carefully as if he were afraid it might fall off. He slid out just as carefully, planting his feet firmly on the ground. The tiny metallic world in his glasses slowing down like gelatin hardening, and in the midst of it, Connie's bright green blouse. Obviously, we can't help but think of the green light in The Great Gatsby, and how I've mentioned before that green is also a symbol associated with Lucifer, remember, in Parzival. But we also have that she represents youth, right? She is youth. She's almost Edenic, and that she is like small to him, to his character. And let's see, this here is my name to begin with, he said. Arnold Friend was written in tar-like black letters on the side. Why is it tar-like? Well, it's tar-like because it's like tar and soot-like, as if he's come from the forges of hell, with a drawing of a round, grinning face that reminded Connie of a pumpkin. Listen, you guys, back in 1979, I saw Hillary stuffing dead babies in the pumpkins. There you go, Jeff. There's your Lurie impression, right? Lurie Nichols. We can't help but think of a pumpkin. I want to introduce myself, right? He's saying he has to introduce himself. I'm Arnold Friend, and that's my real name. And also, obviously, Ichabod Crane with the pumpkin, the decapitated head, the pumpkin. We were just listening to streams about the in the French Revolution, you know, the guillotine and how the Templars before that would, you know, were accused of worshiping a disembodied head, right? This occurs in the Northmen. And we have this sort of disembodied head that exists on the golden chariot, right, of his car, of the light of Lucifer, right? These fucking people, right? What she needs to do is she needs to get her ass to church. She needs to leave this right now, right? She needs to pray and go to church. Forget about this guy. Ellie brought his transistor radio up to his shoulder and balanced it there. Now, these numbers are a secret code, honey, Arnold Friend explained. He read off the numbers. 33, 1917, and raised his eyebrows at her to see what she thought of that. But she didn't think much of it. The left rear fender had done smashed around. It was written on the gleaming gold background, done by crazy woman driver. Connie had to laugh at that. Arnold Friend was pleased at her laughter and looked up at her. Around the other side's a lot more. You want to come and see? Yeah, come on to the other side of this house, right? I know. I'm so sorry. I read this and I forgot that the character was named Ellie. Okay, but listen, it has nothing to do with our beautiful Eliana. Okay, I promise. This is just some scumbag demon. All right, and he stole that name. Let's see. 17 also in gematria, right? 17 is symbolism of 17 is symbolism of man's participation in both worlds, celestial and terrestrial. and the junction between the material world and the spirit world, and that's where these characters seem to be, right? Let's see, the metallic mirror, he observes. See, I already talked about that. I already talked about Judges 1917. Down at the bottom of the page, he laughed as if she had said something funny. He slapped his thighs. He was standing in a strange way, leaning back against the car as if he were balancing himself. He wasn't tall, only an inch or so taller than she would be if she came down to him because he's still on a hell plane, right? Connie liked the way he was dressed, which was the way all of them dressed. Tight, faded jeans stuffed into black scuff boots, a belt that pulled his waist in and showed how lean he was, lean like a wolf. And a white, he's almost like a bad wolf character too, right? Except he's dressed up in the guise of man as a wolf instead of a grandmother. Yes. Oiled and showed the hard, small muscles of his arms and shoulders. He probably did hard work lifting and carrying things. Even his neck looked muscular. Again, his neck is going to come back into play in a second. And his face was a familiar, here's familiar again, right? A familiar face. Somehow, the jaw and chin and cheeks slightly darkened because he hadn't shaved for a day or two, and the nose long and hawk-like, sniffing as if she were a treat he was going to gobble up, and it was all a joke. Because he's a trickster and a wolf, right? Connie, you ain't telling the truth. This is your day set aside for a ride with me, and you know it, he said, still laughing. The way he straightened and recovered from his fit of laughing showed that it had been all fake, because his entire persona, his entire mask is fake, right? He's wearing a human skin suit, right? Also, this is Gnostic. This is like their entire reality that he's in with her. He's taken her into this weird dream zone where they live, where they're communicating in some sort of other world, right? And where all he's trying to do is get her to transcend her human, her frail human body and walk into the light with him, so to speak, I guess. He looked at her. He took off the glasses, and she saw how pale the skin around his eyes was, like holes that were not in shadow, but instead in light. His eyes were like chips of broken glass that catch the light in an amiable way. He smiled. It was as if the idea of going for a ride somewhere to someplace was a new idea to him, because he's just taken on this human form, right? He's got eyes like broken glass because he is reflecting back at her shattered psyche, right? This is like, remember I talked about the book I'm writing, with the mirror man, right? The mirror man, the guy, he's wearing a mask of his own face, and he's got mirror shards for eyes, because it's an ever repeating infinite loop of a shattered mind and psyche traveling through the labyrinthine mind of a broken soul, trying to find one center and make its way back to God. He spoke in it, if only she could, right? He spoke in a simple, lilting voice, exactly as if he were reciting the words to a song, right? Because he's singing his song, right? This is one of the ways that, remember in The Witch, at the end when she writes her name in the book, right? I will guide thy hand, he says, right? And she makes her mark. She makes an X in the book. The X is going to play a part in this short story coming up. And when he appears, right? He shows up and he's Black Phillip, right? And you see his little goat feet, and they turn into human feet in like sort of felt boots with bells on them, right? Which is one of the sort of old medieval signs of Lucifer. He shows up with bells and music. That happens in Hereditary as well. Later on, it says Connie looked away from his smile to the car, which is painted so bright it almost hurt her eyes to look at. She looked at that name, Arnold Friend, right, which is obviously an old friend or a fiend. And flying up at the front fender was an expression that was familiar. Man, the flying saucers. Man, the flying saucers, it says, written on his car. So in other words, he's an interdimensional demon, folks. He is, but he is, right? He is from the other and he wants to take her away. He wants to put her in his chariot and take her away. Also, deep black. It's dreamlike. And what's the other thing? Well, he's going to probe her, of course, right? She is going to be violated. Her body and soul will be violated by this demon. How do I know? He says, you're a hard girl to handle. How come? He said, don't you know I'm your friend? Didn't you see me put my sign in the air when you walked by? What sign? My sign. And he drew an X in the air, leaning out toward her. They were maybe 10 feet apart, and his hand fell down back to his side. The X was still in the air, almost visible. Fuck this guy, right? He hexes her. He puts an X in the air. He makes his mark. He X's her out of society. He does it. He does a Manson family before the other thing. That's what Manson said, right? When he carved that X in his forehead, he said he was X'd out of society. He's Xing her out. Puts his sign in the air, and she can see it still in the air. Fuck this guy. Make the sign of the cross, girl, right? She recognized most things about him. The tight jeans that showed his thighs and buttocks, and the greasy leather boots and the tight shirt, even that slippery, friendly smile of his, that sleepy, dreamy smile that all the boys use to get across ideas they didn't want to put into words. Right? She's recognizing him from a dream that she already knew, that she already called upon him. This is on the next page. She could see then that he wasn't a kid. He was much older. Well, literally, he's much older. He's a creep, but also he's much older because he's as old as time. Like hell you are, she says again, right, with the coded language. He grinned so broadly his eyes became slits, and she saw how thick the lashes were, thick and black, as if painted with the black tar-like material. And then she's introduced to his passenger, right? It was Beelzebub. He wore a bright orange shirt, like he's burning. He sat there in a kind of daze, right in the sun. He says, you're kind of strange, Arnold Friend cried. He pounded on the car to get Ellie's attention. Ellie turned for the first time, and Connie saw with a shock that he wasn't a kid either. He had a fair, hairless skin, cheeks reddened slightly as if the veins grew too close to the surface of the skin, the face of a 40-year-old baby. This guy's a damn lizard person. The heat was finally getting to him. Like hell I am, again. I mean, don't fool around. Okay, he laughed incredulously. He placed his sunglasses on top of his head carefully as if he were indeed wearing a wig, and brought the stems down behind his ears. Connie stared at him, another wave of dizziness and fear rising in her, so that for a moment she wasn't even in focus, but that was just a blur standing there against his gold car, and she had no idea that he had driven up the driveway all right, but had come from nowhere before that and belonged nowhere. And that everything about him, and even about the music, was so familiar to her, only half real. Then the vision seemed to get clear, and he nodded energetically. He goes on to say, he's trying to get her in the car, right? He's trying to get her to go with him. Yes, I'm your lover. You don't know what that is, but you will, he says. I always keep my word. I'll tell you how it is. I'm always nice at first, the first time. I'm not going to read the rest of that paragraph. That's a little too spicy. And then, let's see, her heart was almost too big now for her chest, and its pumping made sweat break out all over. She looked out to see Arnold's friend pause and then take a step toward the porch. Almost fell, but like a clever drunken man, he managed to catch his balance. This is kind of a Jim Morrison walking on the edge of the stage image, but he wobbled in his high boots and grabbed hold of one of the porch posts. Get the hell out of here, she said, because he's a damn demon. He has hooves. Right? He can't walk in his boots because he's hiding his hooves. This is Lucifer, right? Let's see. He wobbled again. Out the side of the mouth came a fast spat curse, an aside not meant for her to hear. But even this, Christ, sounded forced. He curses, right? He takes the Lord's name in vain, but it's forced. He could barely do it, right? He's not even cursing her. Then he began to smile again. She watched his smile come awkward, as if he were smiling from inside a mask. His whole face was a mask, she thought wildly, tanned down to his throat, but then running out as if he had plastered makeup on his face, but had forgotten about his throat. She could tell that he's Lucifer and he's wearing a human mask, right? Honey, listen, here's how it is. I always tell the truth, and I promise you this, I ain't coming in that house after you. She hadn't invited him in, right? One of his boots was at a strange angle, as if his foot wasn't in it. It pointed to the left-hand path, bent at the angle. If the place got lit up with a fire, honey, you come running out into my arms, right into my arms, and safe at home, like you know I was your lover, and stop fooling around. Because we've talked about before, that's what people do in the movies. That's what people do in real life, right? Yeah, they are hounded by evil, and they keep doing evil. And to get out of evil, they run right into the arms of Satan. Right? Just pray. Let's see. He says, oh, she says, my dad's coming home. He's going to get you. She says, no, your daddy is not coming. And yes, you had to wash your hair, and you washed it for me. Right? Almost like she's been baptized. She's baptized herself for him. It's nice. It's shining all for me. I thank you, sweetheart. He said with a mock bow, because everything he does is mocking. But again, he almost lost his balance. He had to bend and adjust his boots. Evidently, his feet did not go all the way down. The boots must have been stuffed with something so that he would seem taller. Then his Beelzebub over there talks, and he says, shut your mouth and keep it shut, Arnold Friend said, his face red. Don't you know who I am? Oh, no. Don't answer that. Right? Oh, you want the telephone pulled out, Ellie said. He held the radio away from his ear and grimaced as if without the radio, the air was too much for him. Right? Because, right, demons transmit through static and radio waves. I mean, isn't that in every movie? Right? I mean, look at Stranger Things, just as an example. Right? They go into this hell world, into the inverted hell world, chasing after they're looking for the demiurge, and they can only communicate back to the world through the airwaves. Then it says, don't hem in on me, don't hog, don't crush, don't bird dog, don't trail me, he said in rapid, meaningless voice, as if he were running through all the expressions he'd learned, but was no longer sure which of them was in style, then rushing onto the new ones, making them up with his eyes half closed. Don't mind him, honey, he's just a creep. I'm the boy for you, and then, like I said, come out here like a nice lady and give me your hand and nobody else gets hurt. I mean, your nice old bald-headed daddy and your mommy and your sister in her high heels, because listen, why bring them in this? Hey, you know that old woman down the road, one with the chickens and the stuff? You know her? She's dead. Dead. He says, you don't want your people in any trouble. Your people, right? Because they're people. They're not his people. She's sick with fear. She cried out. She cried out for her mother. She felt her breath start jerking back and forth in her lungs as if it were something Arnold Friend was stabbing her with again and again with no tenderness. So stabbing her, right? Literally stabbing her, figuratively stabbing her. And the foreshadowing is this is going to happen to her, right? So we have this, this Ted Bundy, Richard Ramirez character here leaning on this car. I can't. Oh no, here come the boss. Get that. Bye, pervert. Peace out, pervert. Right. So we can't help but thank you. Okay. Thank you, sir. Appreciate you. You're a king. And we can't help but think of, if you've ever seen the 1999 movie, Sofia Coppola movie, The Virgin Suicides. I can't help but think that she obviously knows this story and knows it well. That she could not have made that movie and not know this short story, because the scene where Josh Hartnett first arrives, and he's got a red car, not a gold car, but he's leaning on the car exactly like how Arnold Friend is, and he seduces what's her name in the movie? Lux, right? Her name is Lux in the movie, Lux. How could she not have known this short story? Next page 13 of 14. She was hollow with what had been fear, but was now just an emptiness. Arnold Friend said in a gentle, loud voice that was like a stage voice, the place where you came from ain't there anymore, and where you had in mind to go is canceled out. Again, that's the echo of the title, right? Where have you going? Where are you going? Where have you been? And where you had in mind to go is canceled out. It's void, right? It's a void world. I can knock down anytime this house. You know that, and you always did know it. You hear me? She always did know it because she knows it from the echoes, right, of her soul, because again, she was primed for this. Shout out to Andrew, BPF. Love you, homie. The hell with this house. It looks solid, all right. He ran a fingernail down the screen. The screen is, well, running down the screen, right? We got the screen of the phone, but it's the screen of the screen door, and the fingernail is the long the long Luciferian fingernail. And he runs it down the screen because he is breaking on through to the other side, right? He is shattering her world, right? And breaking through in from his other world into her world, where he is almost through with seducing her, and he's going to take her away. She felt her pounding heart. Her hand seemed to enclose it. She thought for the first time in her life that it was nothing that was hers, that belonged to her, but just a pounding living thing inside this body that wasn't really hers either. Her body is now, she knows her body is being taken over by this demon. And again, we have this Gnostic language here, right? A Gnostic transcending out of her own body. It says, now turn this way. That's right. Come over here to me, Ellie. Put that away. Didn't I tell you, you dope, you miserable, creepy dope? Arnold Friend said. His words were not angry, but only part of an incantation. The incantation was kindly. Now come through the kitchen to me, honey, and let's see a smile. Try it. You're a brave girl, sweet girl. Now you're eating corn, hot dogs cooked to bursting over an outdoor fire. You're better than them because you're not one of them, because not a one of them would have done this for you. She brushed her hair back out of her eyes. Arnold Friend let go of the post tentatively and opened his arms for her, his elbows pointing in toward each other and his lips to show that this was an embarrassed embrace and a little mocking. He didn't want to make her self-conscious. Yeah, because he's doing a full-on Baphomet pose here, right? His legs in, his wrists out, his elbows out, and his wrists limp like he's sitting on his Gehe Baphomet throne. He's also mocking because that's what he does, mock. She put out her hand against the screen. She watched herself. She completely dissociates here. She watched herself push the door slowly open as if she were back safe somewhere in the other doorway, watching this body and this head of long hair moving out into the sunlight where Arnold Friend waited. She walks into illumination. This is what I was saying about the John Depp image, right? At the end of The Ninth Gate. She's completed her ritual humiliation and her Masonic initiation, and now she's walking into the arms of Lucifer in the illumination, right? He says, my sweet little blue-eyed girl. That's where we get the Bob Dylan. That's why it's dedicated to Bob Dylan, right? And it's all over now, baby blue. He said in a half-sung sigh, he's singing, right? Because remember, music and Lucifer again, in an incantation, in a half-sung sigh that had nothing to do with her brown eyes, but was taken up just the same by the vast sunlit reaches of the land behind him and on all sides of him, right? Satan standing there saying, yeah, you bow down to me and you can have, all princes and principalities. You have all this. And she goes for it. She takes it. So much land that Connie had never seen before and did not recognize except to know that she was going to it and she's never going to leave. That's the end of it. That's the end of the short story. So that's it, guys. That's about all I got for today. What'd you think of that? That's a weird short story, right? Pretty good. I mean, I just kind of came up with that out of nowhere that we would read that today. And I think that, again, I'm not trying to get anybody to, read or dive into any of this stuff. That's what I'm here for, is to analyze literature that you may have already read, or if you haven't, just to discuss the symbolism and the esoteric symbolism in some of these stories, and how the idea of, in this especially, the idea of culture creation, women's liberation, right? Shouts out to our expert here, Rachel, based homeschool mom, and the crest of the 60s wave, serial killers, occult symbolism, and the overriding and overarching Luciferian tone of this short story shows the degradation and brokenness of youth and the characters in it. So that's about all I got. So thank you so much. Let's check and see if we got anything here. Oh, somebody dropped me a fat PayPal. Let's see. Before I got to get going to my exclusive event, you guys. It's exclusive. Derek drops $5. Appreciate you, Derek. Thank you so much for supporting me, homeboy. Really appreciate you. Thanks to everybody who was here. Everybody who was here last night for our stream. And, we're going to keep going. Again, the next book I'm going to do is Bret Easton Ellis's Lunar Park. We're going to do that pretty soon. That's going to be our big fun stream. We'll do a proper celebration, and then we'll do that. We'll do that one. Shouts out to our homeboy Tristan at Primal Edge Health, who's going to be doing Dostoevsky and Demons, and really look forward to that. And we're going to keep on rolling. So thank you to everybody who was here. Thanks, you guys. Really appreciate y'all. Anybody got any last words before I head out here? It's a beautiful day. It's hot as heck here, you guys. It's hot as heck here. I don't know where y'all are. It's a lot different from last night reading about Alexander Solzhenitsyn in the minus 40 below. Oh, look, hold on. Something's coming in. Minus 40 below in the gulag, right? Oh, from the Wilsons. Rachel Wilson. Rachel, based homeschool, mom Wilson, and Andrew, BPF Wilson, supporting Little Raspy here with $25. Listen, I love y'all. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. You all are so awesome. You're amazing. And yeah, just again, shout out to the Wilsons out there, you guys. And you should subscribe to the Crucible, of course. Go to the Crucible and subscribe. Nobody does it like BPF. And also buy Rachel Wilson's book called History of Feminism on Amazon. She's in the midst of researching and writing another book, so we can't wait till that comes out. And we have some truly based homies out there, and everybody's doing big things. So, you guys, thank you again. And let me check one more time. Oh, and also check out Jerry's latest stream. I said that last night, but check out Jerry's latest stream at Exposing Powerful Lies live streams. He always does the best material. And so thank you, everybody. And I got to go. Got to get on the road. So peace. Love y'all. Thank you. Peace. I'll see y'all later.